I have some important things I want to ask you today. You know, we've been working really hard on a couple of articles. One of them was on the theft of social media, where we had 6 amazing interviews that you did with the real founder of the social media software that created Facebook and so many others, Michael McKibben. Phenomenal interviews. And then we also just posted one on Obama. He's the one that rigged the elections. Y'all need to get over it out there about the Russians and start looking at Obama. But in the course of our investigation, we found out something that was so mind-blowing, it still blows my mind. And we didn't write about it yet because we wanted to make sure that we had vetted this information pretty thoroughly before we brought it to our listeners' attention. And Thomas, I want you to tell the listeners out there the really deep, dark truth of what happened the night of the elections with the computer systems.
Well, Betsy, it's amazing that you are bringing this to light on Truth News Headlines. Your article recently, a few days ago, Obama rigged the election, was profound. And it comes to our friends, our really close new friends with Leader Technologies, and all that they are feeding us in terms of the research that they had done moment by moment. And as you say, a shocking discovery came out. I'm going to go in. I guess I should mention that first. What was that shocking discovery?
This discovery has no names attached to it because it's so explosive. We have to protect the people that actually brought this through several layers of intelligence, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I'm certainly not going to say where this came from, but the confirmation of it is 100%. And the reason we know that is because the very people who wrote the programs that were then used by Facebook and the Department of Homeland Security through an office called the U.S. Digital Service, the people who wrote those programs are the ones who discovered this flaw and then figured out a way to protect it during the elections. And that is the bombshell truth news that we have today. So it needs to be put in perspective, of course, as always. As we can think back and we remember on the news, every single time there was a new primary state election for the Democrats, there was a new type of rigging that was discovered, if you remember. There were even films shown of the election commissioners going in and tampering with the machines. There were everything imaginable. And then later in the full presidential election, we have a professional election rigger, Robert Creamer, who was caught by Veritas Action in 3 different films, stating all the ways that he blatantly rigged the election and was standing by it and defending his own position tooth and nail. So that was, of course, a direct person working with John Podesta and Hillary Clinton through the Democratic National Convention and Robbie Mook. I mean, these are the people who were in charge of Hillary's election, but also the primaries that we're discussing. They're the ones who rigged those primaries. Now, you probably remember that again and again, Bernie Sanders kept complaining that one state after the next was rigged, one election after the next. All the coin tosses came out for Hillary, everything's came out for Hillary. Even when they knew that they had won a state, the numbers did not indicate that. And so people started looking into it at that point because they didn't realize that it could be so definitively rigged. But I guess they had forgotten about George Bush Jr.'s election that then came to contention in the courts in Ohio that showed that the Diebold machines were all rigged.
Ohio? I thought that was Florida.
Ohio and Florida and a number of other states, but it took a big focus in Ohio.
Yeah, that is true.
Hundreds of lawyers defended this case and it got nowhere, though every single machine they demonstrated was fixed to have Bush win with fractional voting, as well as other types of machines throughout the country were also contested. So if there's an electronic machine, it's rigged. Unless, once the votes go in, you can first demonstrate that they aren't fractionally counted. So if you voted for Bush, maybe, if you voted for Bush, you get a vote and a half. If you vote for the other guy, you get a half a vote. Things like that. So they did fractional counting with these digital machines. But worse than that, when all of the different counties report to the state elections commissioner, it goes into a machine, and that machine actually in this 2016 election, believe it or not, it had a direct contact and connection to Facebook. And you might not remember that that's what was stated in public, but it was. And Also, we'll go to 2016 in a minute. But going all the way back to the George Bush Jr. election, it was completely rigged, and we knew about that. So as we saw the primaries rolling out the same type of rigged digital manipulation, particularly in simply going in and changing the numbers. And sometimes those numbers were changed to more voters of age
Well, who
in a
is
state.
changing the numbers? There has to be a programmer back there that programmed this, or someone who's doing it manually.
Yes, it certainly was. And we're going to get into exactly who did that in a minute. But going back that far, it was actually the Diebold Company that was very proud to announce that they would give the election to the Republicans as long as their machines got placed in the proper states. So it is completely possible to rig an election a variety of different ways. But what we were told that the Russians helped meddle in the elections to get Trump elected, when I read about this now in the news a year later, I laugh that any journalist could possibly think that the Russians had rigged the election for Trump.
Now, Thomas, I want to get to the point here. I want to get to the juice. Let's get to it. Tell the folks what's happened here.
On the night of the election, presidential election 2016, as the votes were tallied and they finally get the tallied number for a state, it is sent in to the federal government. This time, unprecedentedly, the Department of Homeland Security was in charge of collecting all that data, not the elections commissioners or the Federal Election Commission. No. It went through Facebook, and then it went through the Department of Homeland Security, which had set up an office in the White House itself. And if you don't remember this, just go back and look in the news. I was completely disgusted and assumed that Trump would miserably fail. But what we now know is that there are white hats, those are the good guys, who are hackers and programmers, the very people who wrote these programs that are being used by social networking and others, found out as they were trying to look at the weaknesses and the fallacies of these systems, they found out that it is so basic that they describe it as being 2 cells on a spreadsheet, and that all they had to do was go in and protect the one cell, which was the total, and the new cell already created that already had a targeted number that was going to go into it, which would look somewhat real, but would certainly give the election to Hillary Clinton. So what they did is, these white hats, these hackers, these programmers, who are not happy because they themselves have had their patents stolen and everything else imaginable by the federal government, went in and put protection around that total. Now, we know that during the primaries that those totals were messed with by election commissioners from the county to the state, all the way up to the federal government. With Karl Rove, he actually set up a remote office of basically election cyber warfare that produced our totals for us when Karl Rove was in charge of elections. So we know that these things have been going on for a long time, but I'm going to tell the story here in a minute once we get the full impact of what was just said. White hats saved the election. Trump would not have been elected. Now,
that's why Hillary Clinton could walk around and just, she's going to win, the coronation will be here any day. And think about it, all the agencies that were in the tank for Hillary and all this massive corruption. And in the end, if that wasn't enough, they had the internal computer configurations such that no matter if Donald Trump won or not, they were going to throw the votes to Hillary.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's why Hillary had a multi-million-dollar fireworks display ready to go in New York, because she knew she was winning.
Right, but the connection to Facebook. Whoa, what is Facebook? A private company in the middle of our election process.
Well, what we're going to tell you today is what we have learned from the Americans for Innovation and their website, and some of the people, their shareholders and some of their supporters who we've been talking with, as you well know, who have informed us of these things, which are so shocking, which you then put into articles and made sure that they got out on Truth News headlines. But let's just go back to the night of the election. Why did Hillary know she was going to lose? Why did she not show herself? Why did she put out no effort in the end of her campaign? She thought she was going to win. She was certain of it. Why on that night was she so angry? If it was a fair election, why was she so angry? Why did she come out later and scream at all of us, "Why did I lose? It's your fault," pointing at everyone in the camera? It's absurd what we saw. It made no sense whatsoever unless they were convinced the election was so rigged that they were going to win no matter what. George Soros himself said, "Oh, don't worry. Donald Trump will win the popular vote. I can't stop that. But I can make sure that he does not get through the Electoral College because of the paid political announcements that I have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on." By the way, his hundreds of millions of dollars in the last few weeks before the election, where did that money come from, Donna Brazil, seeing that you said that they were broke and that it was only a $25 million donation from Hillary that kept the election going, the Democratic National Committee? Wrong, 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 wrong. George Soros gave to Hillary's super PAC, what was it called, Victory, whatever. That super PAC gave to Jill McCabe for her election, and that super PAC also paid for the Fusion GPS fake Russian dossier. I've said this from the beginning, and I will eventually be proven correct. But we now do know that the dossier was paid for both by the Democratic National Committee and by Hillary's campaign. They don't say exactly where. I say it's her super PAC called Victory. Why? Because it's the same place that the money came from to bribe Terry McAuliffe, to bribe Andrew McCabe, who was heading the supposed investigation /matter/ignore/exoneration of Hillary Clinton's email. It's not a scandal. It is an espionage security violation unequaled in U.S. history. And McCabe got her off of that because why? Hillary gave to Jill McCabe, his wife, who was running for election in the same state as Terry McAuliffe, who is the head of the Clinton Foundation, and of course is as corrupt as he can possibly be with Charlottesville and all those other things. He also wanted to run for, he'd probably be her vice president running campaign in 2020 if she runs, because they still think that they're innocent and clear and free and off and scot-free because we don't know the truth. The truth is so friggin' shocking that it will explain why Hillary can't get over it, and she's on Earth too, as the president of America in a different, a parallel universe in her mind, as she had in a recent conversation with Salon on their network. So Hillary is not over it. They even wanted to impeach Trump. They still keep thinking about impeaching Trump or disqualifying the election.
I think, after watching that video of Hillary discussing Earth 2 towards the end, if you listen carefully, you almost hear her confession at her own confusion of how did they lose the election. You see, they had this thing rigged. And for something didn't go right. And what didn't go right was the White Hats went in and protected those final result cells so it couldn't be thrown. Now let's get back to that and let's talk about those details.
Okay, you have to go back to 2008 when Eric Schmidt, the head of the head of Google, which mother company's name is Alphabet, which is a lie. But anyway, Eric Schmidt and Alphabet stated in 2008 that they were going to he was proud to state that he was going to create algorithms that would support Obama. Now, this is shocking. He made these statements publicly. There's hardly anything written about this. But so we know this started back at least in 2008, if not before, that Eric Schmidt said that he could push things down on searches, he could bring other things up, he could hide things, he could bring things forward. And that's what he did in 2008. But in 2014, it literally became quite physical in that Hillary Clinton actually, starting in 2010, had already taken what was called the Eric Schmidt plan. And that plan was what he had already did in 2008. And they advanced it. And the plan even was written out in emails that WikiLeaks came out with that said that Eric Schmidt made the notes on a Democratic election where he laid it all out, the way that he was going to take the Democratic National Committee server and their VAN program on voters and create an individualized program for every single voter, not just Democrats, but also Republicans. Then he would target them and then he would attack them. And he laid all this out in a very, very, very long letter. And then they hired someone who took the plan that they already had before with Google, and at Facebook, they hired a Russian, Dmitry Lashashevich. I can't remember his last name. Anyway, Dmitry the Russian at Facebook.
No, but not Dmitry Alperovich from CrowdStrike.
No, Levashenko is his name. Dmitry Levashenko was hired. He's one of the most famous programmers. He's a Russian. He created what was called the template for winning for Hillary. He was paid in 7 different installments. Facebook was paid $750,000 from the Government Services Agency by Hillary Clinton herself as Secretary of State to create a program to use Facebook to do the same thing that Google had done. But then Google also had amped it up. And so Google and Facebook were directly working together. And then
paid for by the government, correct?
That is correct.
Approved by Hillary Clinton with the final intention of rigging the election for Hillary. For her. Right. Okay. I just want to make sure everybody gets that. Hillary Clinton sits there as Secretary of State. And what is this government entity called again in the middle that then hired Facebook?
Well, it's called the United States Digital Service.
And you mentioned another name.
Well, it's also called 18F.
Okay.
And it's also called it was started off with the name the Eric Schmidt Project. Then it became the Template to Win. Then it became an office in the White House using $1.5 billion US called the U.S. Digital Service under the guise of trying to modernize all technology. It had actually became a cyber warfare bunker to attack Trump or the Republicans, and later, of course, strictly Trump. And so there was meddling. And by the way, they used Russians, and they used, we can go into Uranium One and all that, all that money. But the Russians were deeply, deeply involved, but not on the side of Trump. And who was actually running the communist-style Russian meddling? That would be Barack Obama under Valerie Jarrett. And it was Bob Creamer who came over from the Democratic National Convention Committee and particularly Hillary's camp, who visited the White House 345 times during that administration, and Barack Obama himself 3 times, and Valerie Jarrett 39 times during the election cycle. So Valerie Jarrett obviously was the corrupt Chicago mafia type boss running the rigged election out of the United States Digital Service in the White House with U.S. taxpayer $1.5 billion money.
And so now they pay Facebook to do what?
To push things down, pull things up, hide things, bring things forward. Now, we know that they have a thing called X Keyscore, and it's now open for anyone to use, and Facebook was using it. So if Facebook wanted to do a query, and this has been described also by the head of the Global Engagement Center, who runs the Board of Broadcasting Governors, who I talk about all the time, because that's the person who was doing this under the auspices of saying that they were Russian accounts. I say that's complete nonsense unless they were either RT or Sputnik, who also was pushed down during the election, making sure that the Russian news agencies did not get brought up to the attention of Americans, because they were, of course, saying negative things about both candidates, but they want to insinuate, first off, remember that as soon as the election happened, they tried to impeach Trump by carrying out and finishing 2 investigations into Russian meddling in the election. Both of the reports were given out to the public. No one seems to have read them. I've read every word in them, and it's nonsense. There's no evidence in it at all. What they say is RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik influenced the election, and therefore they have now recently, in the last few weeks, made RT and Sputnik sign up as foreign agents, as if our 8 foreign agents that are literally radio stations and television stations in Russia, which now Putin is making sign that they have to sign up as foreign agents acting in Russia. We're playing this game as if Russia is our enemy. No. We're going to do another audio today.
Sounds like the enemy is Facebook and Eric Schmidt and Hillary Clinton, Obama. It sounds like all these globalists are the enemy. And I don't know why people don't wake up and see that.
The original largest holders in Facebook were both Russians, Uri Milner and Alishar Usmanov, and both of them are corrupt. And both of them then went, Uri, a friend of Larry Summers, who is as corrupt as anyone can possibly be in economics, head of the World Bank, head of Harvard, head of the U.S. Treasury, head of the National Economic. All those are the Russians, and it's not Russians who meddled in our election. If they were meddling to help Hillary, because Hillary is their best friend. We'll talk about the fact that let's just take for an instance, April 10th, 2010, during the Nuclear Security Summit that Hillary called in Washington, D.C., she gave to Russia $400 million to help them downgrade their plutonium. This was built upon an agreement that she had with Rosatom, Uranium One, who owns Uranium One. Okay, she wants to say that all of that was debunked, her and Uranium One. You must be kidding. She called a summit and gave away $400 million to Russia to degrade their plutonium, and at the same time gave a no-bid contract privately to a company which was a go-between company previously when we took uranium from Russia, brought it to America, and paid $12 billion for it. That was ending in 2013, so Hillary set up the next thing, which is the whole Uranium One scandal, and she started off by giving them $400 million that we should have never given them, and another $17 million on that day, on the 10th, and then on the 13th we gave them $400 million. I mean, this is absurd. Russia's not our enemy. So when we say Russia intervened in the election or meddled in the election, it would only be to support Obama and Hillary. And since they're the opposite of Trump, you can bet your bottom dollar that Putin hates Trump.
Thomas, I know that all of that is very important, and you could talk for hours on that, but I would like to go back to this very particular point that the algorithms, the computations, or whatever, they were rigged to throw the election literally to Hillary. And the White Hats had to go in there and protect those cells. Tell me about that. Let's just focus on that. How did that happen? How did they know that it was corrupt? The White Hats, how did they know that? How did they go in and protect it? And what was the reaction of the Hillary camp once they realized that their final attempt had failed?
Well, when the totals started being messed with, which we could see on national television and all the channels, you at first saw that Hillary was in a fantastic lead, didn't you? As the first states started to come in, Hillary was in a fantastic lead. And you said, wait, that can't be. That's not even right. Those totals can't be right. She's actually had more people report than Trump has had report. And then this was noticed on the news, and they're going, oh, well, this is some kind of incongruency, and we don't quite know why Hillary's, so far ahead. That's because at first they saw that the totals coming out of the early state returns had been manipulated. So the White Hats got very busy. As I said before, they'd already noticed this was going on. When they saw this happen, then they put a clamp down. They went into these systems.
So they noticed this at the primaries, and then they began to notice in the general election? Or
yes.
Did they notice it just in the general election?
No, in the primaries, they saw it happening. They figured out how to countermand it. But then when they started seeing it happening on the screen during the election between Trump and Hillary, they went in and they froze those cells. And they froze the cell where the new number, so let's say, 2 million was supposed to go in the cell as the total count for a state. Well, it turned out for Hillary, to be a bigger number. For her, it would have been, they simply changed the cell. But they blocked this one cell and put a freeze around the other cell so the number could not be manipulated. Those numbers were already chosen, but they couldn't be plugged in until right before they were sent. And then it would have to be moved back, you see, because there, in many of these states, there were no paper trail. This is all electronic. Now, let's remember, let me go back a little bit. You hear now when pathetic mainstream media, I would love to debate any mainstream media person on this topic, because all you have to do is call into mind what it is that they said that night, call into mind what was well known, what was spoken of, what was the narrative that they were all reading from the Associated Press and Reuters. So what was the narrative? 21 states had phishing attacks on polls before the election. Lie. There were 20 people who worked at polls, who weren't even at the polls on their own personal computer, that had phishing. They weren't attacks. These were simply commercials saying, would you like to buy polling equipment? That was a lie. That was sent from Homeland Security. And that was sent as the excuse that there was Russian phishing, because anyone who tells you, and listen to this closely, people, anyone who tells you that there's Russian footprints in hacking is an idiot, is a moron, should not even be speaking. Their tongue should be simply tied, because that is complete nonsense. Everyone knows, because of Vault 7 and all before that, from William Binney and everyone else, any hacker leaves Russian footprints. That is the footprint they leave. That is how they cover themselves. It is a complete stupidity that anyone thought that the Russian footprint in the Democratic National Convention server was real. So the phishing attacks, which then caused Homeland Security to come in and say there have been 20 or 21, depending on who you're speaking to. Sometimes they range it up to 26, 28. All these states were attacked. Therefore, Homeland Security has to do the final tally on everything. All the votes have to come to the White House, to Valerie Jarrett's war bunker, the United States Digital Service, which was manned and womaned by nothing but Google staff sent by Eric Schmidt in periods of 2 to 3 months at a time to make sure no one got the full picture, so no one could be a whistleblower on this. And they worked on desperate parts of the U.S. government data. It was all a lie. They didn't update anything. They said that Obama was changing everything into a digital age. Lie! Obama was turning it all over to the NSA and making sure that then, as he, at the end of his own administration, allowed all NSA data, raw data, to be given out to anyone with a clearance. That's 865,000 people with top secret security clearances. So basically, he made it a free-for-all, because there was already a battle, as you've heard me say many times, between the intelligence agencies. And so he had to create his own. And then he took his own guy, his own chief of technology, whose name is Todd
Parks.
Park.
Or Park. Mm-hmm.
And sent him to Hillary's camp in 2014, paid by U.S. taxpayers, to help Hillary's Facebook campaign called Template to Win be effective. And he stayed there until after the election. U.S. taxpayers, under Obama's orders, sent Obama's top security guy, technology guy, to work for Hillary from 2014 on. And then he created, and because he was no longer in the White House, he was also in control of all the technology in the White House. And, I could go into more details about that, but let's just say that this office set up, the U.S. Digital Service, became the central command for unmasking Trump's activities through Susan Rice, giving it to Valerie Jarrett. And then Valerie Jarrett was basically the commander-in-chief of the rigged election. And Eric Schmidt was her lieutenant. And Mark Zuckerberg was her private first class. And those weren't the only ones used. But those were the two major ones. And they now admit this. And so that's why Zuckerberg came out and said that it was 470 Russian accounts that put those ads up that were memes that were supposedly swayed the election. Complete nonsense. Those few $100,000 is nothing. Those ads would have affected nobody. And they actually did a statistical analysis recently to show how many people saw those ads, and it's like 13% of the people might have seen them. And that doesn't mean that it affected them in any way whatsoever.
So you're going to send the government a check for all your research you've been doing? It seems to me that with this kind of research, Thomas, Mueller doesn't need to go any further. He just needs to take your citizen intelligence reports and send them on up to the president.
What you're releasing right now on Truth News headlines, and in the past, particularly the one you sent out on an alert, Obama rigged the election, is one of the most profound and most powerful things in the news today. Nothing else compares, not even the Uranium One deal, which I've explained before. They're going to blame on everybody else. But when it comes to the rigging, There is no way out of the rigging. Now, they will say it was Valerie Jarrett, and that's my prediction, by the way. They'll say it wasn't Obama. They'll say it was Susan Rice. It wasn't Obama. They'll say that it was Samantha, what's her name? Powers, who unmasked. Not Obama. Hello? They reported all this to Obama. This was in his White House.
Yes,
1.5.
He
He created
this. He created this mess, and he supervised this mess.
Final
words?
He created the United States Digital Service, which rigged the election, and it's all a fact. It's all proven. We have all the documents. No one can get around this, and this is what they're trying to hide. This is why when John Podesta, Robbie Mook, and Bob Creamer came up with, and Hillary Clinton, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and John Podesta, and George Soros came up, and Alexandra Chupla, with the idea for the Russian dossier and to use Russia as the tool to attack Trump. Why? Because that's where they were vulnerable. They might as well, they're all in bed with Trump, with Putin. He must have a huge bet over there in Russia, because we have already demonstrated all the, whether it be John Podesta's 75,000 shares in Juul, whether it be $35 million invested in that company, his wrong divestiture, his lobbying, his brother Tony Podesta, all their Ukrainian one lobbying, the lobbying for the Russian banks, and so on and so forth. We have shown this over and over again. We've given all the proof. We now need to set up not the U.S. Digital Service in the White House to attack the opposite party so that you can win the election. We need to simply set up a whole new building of special prosecutors who have to go after these people for their crimes against the United States Constitution and U.S. citizens.